Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. You know, in these troubled times, our millions of fans all over the world are clamoring for more Keiser Reports. 3 a week is not enough. They're like, we want more, we want more. Well, you know, it's possible, but you have to make a big noise. Let the people know that you want more, Max and Stacy, more Keiser Reports. Yeah! Stacy.
Max, we are reporting from our headquarters in the coronavirus zone. And you know what? The national debt has passed $24 trillion in the past week. I remember back in those innocent balloon boy sort of days back in 2009 during the last crash when it was just 12 trillion, 6.6 million unemployed last week. That's on top of the millions others in the previous week's 5.5 plus 3.6 plus blah, blah, blah. So now we have 17 million unemployed. That's over 10% unemployment rate. And of course, during this chaotic time, during the announcement of the new unemployment numbers, we saw the Fed introduce some new sort of $2.3 trillion scheme whereby they're going to buy high yield bond ETFs, i.e. junk debt, i.e. well, the fracking debt, all that fracking debt that's blowing up.
That's right. We knew the fracking industry was going to go belly up and that it would require a government bailout. We said that was 100% guaranteed. And we were right. You know, that's the thing about mainstream media. Not only are they forced to be broadcasting out of their basement, not only is Channel 4 in the UK now bankrupt and forced to be on the street and speaker's corner blabbering about to whoever they might gather in these times of social distancing, but we've been right. We've been right for 10 years. Right about fracking, right about the Fed, right about money printing, right about the stock market, right about the gold market, right about the silver market. And we were the only ones in the world to tell people to buy Bitcoin at $1. Back in 2011, we made hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin millionaires in 100 different countries. And that's why we're considered to be almost the Adam and Eve of Bitcoin.
I think you coined that term on Twitter, but also on Twitter, I found this tweet from Matt Stoller, and he's looking at, we're in the middle of an election, theoretically, that might happen in November 2020, and it's supposed to be Biden versus Trump. And you would think during these sort of times, the Democrats would present plans and what they would do as opposed to what Trump is doing. Well, progressives simply cannot internalize that a massive corporate bailout just occurred, that it will shift wealth and power upward, and that their leaders, Warren and Bernie, who got popular opposing Wall Street, supported it. Progressives have chosen to be irrelevant.
This is what I don't get about the progressive media. So let's talk about Jimmy Dore, Amy Goodman, Cenk Janker, and to some lesser extent, Joe Rogan, right? They look at these numbers and they look at what's happening in the economy, but they make no connection to the Federal Reserve Bank and money printing. Jimmy Dore's never mentioned the central bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, ever. And yet the progressives, if they want to be progressive and they want to progress the dialogue forward, they need to talk about the central bank. It is the key component of the global economy, the American economy, and the key crisis that we're experiencing today. So not to mention it is willfully ignorant.
Exactly. We have two different categories happening, the government and the Treasury, and then the Federal Reserve. And basically, neither of them have oversight. And they're pouring trillions of dollars to the corporate headquarters of huge corporations, not the small and medium-sized enterprises that are being funneled onto these crazy sort of online systems that don't work, but the major corporations, the multinationals, those that are getting bailed out, and the big banks. And the ordinary worker that, by the way, the left-wing party is supposed to speak on behalf of, they're stuck on trying to file unemployment benefits, and those unemployment benefits are built on COBOL, which is a software program written back in the 1950s, and there's only like a handful of people in the United States that are still programmers in COBOL. So the systems are going down across America, and people can't apply for unemployment online. They have to go in person, stand amongst thousands of other people trying to file online.
Right. So as the unemployment rate is now projected to reach 30% in America, higher than the Great Depression, the stock market's up 30% from recent lows, and the size of the central bank balance sheet has expanded by trillions. So the question is, which came first, the expansion of the central bank balance sheet or unemployment? What is the cause? What is the effect? As we've been saying on this show for 10 years, central bank balance sheet expansion causes the unemployment because it causes the deflation that causes the economic duress that creates the unemployment. The central bank will say, point blank, we're trying to fight deflation by printing money. And yet they caused the deflation by printing money. Oh, and the stock market happens to be up 30%. And the top 0.1% just made a few more $100 billion. It's an accident. That's what progressives don't understand. They don't understand that taxes and employment are not necessary. At 0% interest rates, and if you can print and borrow hundreds of trillions of dollars at a clip, you don't need workers. You don't need taxes. Americans paid $3.5 trillion in taxes last year. The Fed printed $6.5 trillion in 10 seconds last week, right? You don't need workers. You don't need employment. You know, if employment rate went to 100% unemployment, the stock market would be at 40, 50,000 on the Dow.
Of course, because anytime the progressives do fight, and they fought tooth and nail to get a $400 billion package in for the ordinary person in America, apparently that's not going to, a lot of that money won't even arrive for months from now. But immediately the Fed can create money and credit for all of these bankers. But every time they succeed in getting $400 billion for the ordinary Joe Bag of Donuts, then the bankers go, well, we can't disrupt. We need to get at least 10 times that back. We need triple, quadruple, quintuple, tentuple that.
Well, it's designed to disenfranchise every American who's not a friend of the central banks until we have a peasant class like you have in Saudi Arabia and a prince class like they have in Saudi Arabia. Jamie Dimon is a prince, and the central bankers and the bankers on Wall Street are the prince class in this neo-feudal period, and everyone else is part of the peasantry. What you used to call the middle class are becoming peasants. They're living out of their trailers. They're eating dog food. They can't scrape enough to get by. They're like Haitians trying to pick worms out of dirt. And that's the way it's designed.
We also designed the situation in Haiti, of course.
Right, whether it's disenfranchisement in Haiti or bombing in Iraq or the war in Afghanistan or the attack on South American countries and the coups, that's all off-Broadway production of what became a Broadway production here in America. You know, people cheered the bombing of Iraq. Again, mainstream media, MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, CNN, yeah, let's bomb Iraq. Not realizing this is a off-Broadway production of what's coming to America within 2 or 3 years. Now we are experiencing the full frontal attack of our government attacking us.
Now, you're watching many shows across America on cable news and on the networks as well. You know, people are reporting from their basements and their attics and their mom's bedroom. And what you're seeing is that they're still gossiping. It's all essentially YouTube channels of people gossiping about various political figures, whereas they ignore the entire elephant in the room, which is the fraud that is ongoing. Here we'll show 2 tweets about the Federal Reserve Bank and what they're doing on behalf of their clients, who are the big banks on Wall Street. The biggest experiment in monetary history, central banks buying government bonds like crazy to monetize the public debts, will not work indefinitely. No one can say exactly where the tipping point is. If the balance sheet exceeds a certain level, inflation expectations will skyrocket. And you see in the chart there, that top line is, of course, Japan, where the central bank balance sheet as a percentage of GDP is 109.91%. The Fed is that blue line down on the bottom, and they're at 26.75% of GDP, ECB at 43.68%, and the Bank of England merely at 21.7%.
This idea that there's an end game to the debt monetization that they choose to call quantitative easing is problematic, because in a world of 0% interest rates and infinite credit, they can keep buying government bonds, they can keep buying junk bonds, they can keep buying stocks. They can, you know, Japan, the amount of the balance sheet of the Bank of Japan is in excess of the GDP of Japan, and they've got close to 300% debt to GDP as a country. America, on that basis, can buy another $15 trillion worth of bonds and stocks. And the end game is not a collapse due to a policy and an economic model that's unsustainable. The end game is that you have a prince class that owns all income-producing assets in the country, and you have a pauper class or a peasant class that is living in the dirt. It's neo-feudalism by design. It's not a mistake in policy. And the answer has to do with understanding that the central bank is at the center of it all?
The answer is watching Keiser Report and knowing about gold, silver, and Bitcoin. You don't need to participate in this system. You will be a loser in the system. Sure, keep on tuning into Colbert and The View and Rachel Maddow and get your bread in circuses and say, boo Bernie or boo Trump. And that might make you feel better. It might help you get through the next hour. But how do you get through the next decade, the next 2 decades? And you're going to have to step away from the bread and circuses, and you're going to have to wake up, because what they're doing is they are buying junk ETFs. I didn't think they'd go there, said John Briggs, head of strategy at NatWest. So even the bankers didn't think that the central banks would be so brazen in helping them out like that.
Well, you're absolutely right. The only way to escape this is gold, silver, and Bitcoin. Bitcoin's already made a move from $1 to 7,000, 8,000, based on its anticipation of this fraudulent behavior by central banks. It was designed to fight central banks, and it made a move from $1 to the 7,000, on its way to 100,000, on its way to 400,000. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. Gold is now not only making new all-time highs against every major currency in the world, but now about to make a new all-time high in US dollar terms. So gold is not fooled. Gold is now creeping higher. Plus LBMA and COMEX are caught short gold, and they're about to go completely bankrupt.
Well, those two entities do exist in a paper world controlled by the central banks, so they could print money as much as is required to deliver, because they could do force majeure and not have to deliver physical gold. But again, you know, Bitcoin, as you mentioned, went from $1. When did it go from $1? 2009, as I said, during those glory days when, you know, the biggest hoax on earth was Balloon Boy. Now we have the hoax of these bailouts and stimulus that are total hoaxes. They say they're helping you. Here's $400 billion, peasants, and you might not get it until next year. In the meantime, we've just created $40 trillion for bankers because of the notion that how dare somebody even think of helping the peasants. So
right. Bitcoin anticipated this. That's why I said multi-thousands from $1. And now as more people realize, wait a minute, this Bitcoin thing was actually right, and the Keiser Report was right, then they start to make a move to 100,000, up to 400,000. And we told you first. And Stephen Colbert is in his basement and looks like a frickin' trailer park trash, untalented, unfunny idiot. Stay tuned for much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Mark Yusko of Morgan Creek Capital. Welcome back, Mark.
Max, thanks for having me. Always great to be with you.
This is a once in a 100-year event, I think. And so just walk us through how you handle that. You're a frontline money manager guy. So this hits, what happens?
I appreciate the placing us in the front line. I definitely would not put us up there with the angels and saints on the true front lines in the healthcare situations, but also, you know, it's the food delivery workers, it's the food preparers, it's the people who are, you know, cleaning up and keeping buildings safe and germ-free so that other people can do their job. So they're the real front line. But I like the fact that, look, we do have to keep capital safe, and we are there's as big a threat to what we do in terms of the asset management business today as any time I've seen in my career, in my lifetime. We probably have to go all the way back to 1930 to see a similar type threat. I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But the real issue today is it's not the virus that's the threat. We got lots of viral threats around the world, some that are actually worse than COVID. It's the response, the unprecedented response, both to shut down the global economy, but now worse, the response from fiscal and monetary stimulus around the world that is, I think, sowing the seeds of a greater demise.
Unemployment rate is skyrocketing, and some projecting it to reach 30%. I think in the Depression of the 1930s, it got to as high as maybe 25%. So an unemployment rate that's higher even than that time. However, there are some key differences. So back in the 30s, we had a gold standard. We had also, we did not have the kind of activist Fed that we have now that is the buyer of first order instead of being the borrower of last resort. We also have 0% interest rates, which are unique almost in history. We also have negative interest rates, which are definitely unique in history. So when the unemployment number comes out and it's skyrocketing by 30% projected, but the stock market goes up by 30%, that's an interesting situation. It's only made possible by 0% interest rates, or what Neil Kashkari said recently on 60 Minutes, infinite QE, infinite amount of money printing. So that's different than the 1930s, or is it, Mark?
It's interesting that you and I seem to get together on these historic days, right? We were together when Kashkari made his famous infinity comment, and I told you I've had this hashtag QE forever for a long time. And I think you even made it the label of our last show. And here we are again on this historic day where I tweeted out earlier that we're at the tipping point, capital T, capital P, where we've now turned the dollar into toilet paper, right? We basically said, it doesn't matter how much we print, we're going to keep printing until the bleeding stops. And I think what we're experiencing, and the reason I'm not sure it's going to work and why I do think we are at risk of a greater depression is if you think about how commerce works, right? There have to be people employed. There has to be a velocity of money. And if I have $1 and then I go get my hair cut, and then the hair cutter goes out and buys a shirt, and the shirt seller goes and gets a meal, and the restaurateur goes to the butcher, and the butcher goes to the hotel, then that money is actually circulating in the economy, and we get GDP growth, and we get profits growth, and we get real creation of wealth. If I just print $1 and it's sitting in a bank account somewhere, and then we print another $1 and it's just sitting in a bank account somewhere, actually all we've done is decrease the value of that currency by half, because now we have more dollars without any increased circulation. And I think that's where we are, in that if you go back to the Great Depression, from 1929 to early 1930, we fell 30%. And then there was a series of events where the president, Hoover at the time, came out and said, everything's great, everybody's going to go back to business, America's awesome, we're going to have America first. We borrowed that from the Germans, from your old homeland. And all this great stuff was supposedly going to happen. The market rallied 18, 20%. Oh, and then we realized that, wait a minute, if we put up barriers to trade, like the Hawley-Smoot tariff bill, and we go against immigration, and we do all the things that slow economic growth and slow velocity of money, we destroy capitalism. And what happened? We all know the end result. We went down another 50% over the next 3 or 4 years, and we turned a garden variety recession into the Great Depression. And you said, we didn't have zero interest rates. We actually did. We also had QE. We also were buying our own bonds, because back then we were an emerging market run by a gang, right? The mafia was basically in charge. No one would buy our debt, so we started buying it ourselves. So QE is not new. Zero interest rates are not new. We had it all during that Great Recession, which turned into the Great Depression. And I fear we're on the verge of that again if we make bad policy decisions.
What's your portfolio mix? I mean, not to get too technical here, but classic portfolio mix being stocks, bonds, cash, a little gold, and you introduced really to the institutional investors out there the idea of getting off zero with Bitcoin. I think that's probably held up well for your clients that took that advice, because that's become one of the least volatile assets to hold in this time, certainly less volatile than oil. And so how do you handle this on the portfolio allocation side? Do you just raise a lot of cash, or are you forging ahead into buying the dip? How do you position?
What we're doing is the same thing we've been doing since January of 2018. Right before Volmageddon, the first one, which the recent bout in volatility makes Volmageddon look like a bump. So what we started doing back then was we said, look, we fear that Hooverville is coming, right? I actually wrote a paper on it 3 years ago when Trump was elected, saying, look, he was just like Hoover, an inexperienced president who had all these bombastic ideas about America first and how it was going to be so great. But what he lacked was leadership and experience. And I was worried that we were going to have a repeat of Hooverville and the Great Depression. And so what we told clients was, we've got a different way of looking at the world. And I took a lot of for this. In fact, people would say, you're going to have clients leave. And I said very clearly, which I took a lot of for too, is I said, I'd rather lose half my clients than half my clients' money. And I think that's really true. So back in January 18, we built a portfolio and it looks like this. It's got 6 pillars. So about 15% is cash, because cash is king in this environment. Another 15% in Bitcoin. And we'll talk more about that, I'm sure. Another 15% in a proxy on Bitcoin mining. So the best I could do there was AMD. Then had 15% in emerging markets, because I thought emerging markets were, if you're going to own equities, you want to own the cheap equities. Emerging markets were cheaper. 15% in long treasuries, and then 15% in hedged equity. And we run a hedged equity portfolio here. It's long short. It's actually only down about 3% in March and down 2% for the year. So if you look at that portfolio over the last 12 months, and why do I talk about the last 12 months? Well, 12 months ago, I was on CNBC and was talking about this type of portfolio and literally got laughed off the stage. How could you own Bitcoin for clients? And how could you be in bonds? And don't you know stocks always beat bonds? Well, actually, over the last 20 years, long bonds have beat stocks. And over that 2-year period where stocks are down about 5%, that portfolio that I just described is up about 22%. So that's pretty good. People are feeling pretty good about that.
I think it's unprecedented to have central banks so aggressively buying stocks in the open market. They're buying ETFs, they're buying junk bonds. The Swiss National Bank is one of the biggest holders of Apple stock. And right now, they seem to be going with Donald Trump's message that the only thing that matters in this world are people's 401k accounts and getting that stock market back up higher. And if you can borrow all the money you want at 0% interest, and you're buying all the stocks you want without any limitations at all, and you've got a lot of hedge funds who are front running that action with a lot of money. There's a lot of cash out there. The Saudi wealth fund's huge. The Norwegian wealth fund is huge. There's still a lot, the pockets of trillions of dollars out there. And if they get into the front running game, and it's just keep buying these stocks to help with people's 401k plans, is it prudent to not kind of follow the trend there?
It's such the question, Max, and that's why I love getting together with you, is you've always got the question for the time that we're in. And the reason that is the question is, look, everything that we've talked about up to this point about how it could be a repeat of the 1930s and the Great Depression or the Greater Depression, that's only one scenario. And as Soros says, the idea that you can predict the markets precisely is folly. You have to think in scenarios. So it's a non-zero probability that we're in the verge of another Great Depression. There is a non-zero probability that everything you described about the Fed and the fiscal stimulus actually getting into the equity markets and pumping up nominal stock prices. And the key word there is nominal. What people forget is that rising asset prices are not necessarily a good thing. And they're definitely not a good thing for the 49% of people in this country that don't own any assets. They don't own stocks. They don't own collectible Porsches. They don't own fine wine. They don't own great real estate. So what's happening here is kleptocracy. And it's been going on for decades. And this is the plan, right? QE was not designed to create economic growth. QE was designed to impoverish the 99% and enrich the 1%. And everything that's been going on in the last couple weeks is greater degrees of that. The idea of MMT a year ago, people said, well, that's ridiculous. And people like Trump who talked about it were stupid. Well, he's still stupid for talking about it, but now we're going to live it. It's actually happening. There is a belief now that we can print as much money as we want. We can buy any asset, right? It's actually illegal. As we sit here talking, it is illegal for the Fed to be buying corporate bonds and high yield bonds, but they're doing it. They set up an SPV funded by the Treasury to get around it. That is illegal activity. Why do we allow it to happen? And yes, the Swiss National Bank and the Bank of Japan buy stocks, and the Fed would like to buy stocks. Janet Yellen is saying we should buy stocks. No, we shouldn't. But they actually do. There's something called the Plunge Protection Team, and they operate from 10 o'clock in the morning to 11:30 every day. And what they do is the primary dealers get their bonds bought from the Fed, and then they give the loans to the hedge funds or to leveraged speculators or to the bank balance sheet themselves, and they go buy equities. So look at the stock market every day from 10 to 11:30. It just goes straight up. And then we kind of meander during the middle of the day. And then from 2 to 3 o'clock, it goes up again because that's when buybacks happen. Now, buybacks are down, so it's not happening quite as much. But then at 3:30, that's when the smart money trades. That's when the institutions trade. And if you look over the last 6 months, they've been selling. They've been distributing. Not every single day, but by and large, the smart money is selling. And is it possible that all of this, cronyism and crony capitalism that is funneling money into the top 1% could make the stock market go up? Yep, it's definitely possible. It's a scenario we have to consider.
Yeah, well, don't forget then at 4 o'clock, it's cocktails at Harry's at Hanover.
Absolutely.
All right, Mark, Yusko, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max. Thanks, Stacy. Love being with you guys and can't wait to have a cocktail with you out of isolation.
So we can have a virtual one online. Anyway, that's going to do it for this edition of Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. Want to thank our guest, Mark Yusko of Morgan Creek Capital. If you want to catch us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.